Hey guys, and welcome back to my poker vlog. I'm Philip, aka PK Poker, and we finally arrived in Vegas. After over 20 hours of traveling, we picked up our car and checked in the beautiful Resorts World Las Vegas. Pretty shortly after that we went to bed, but the jet lag already kicked in and I couldn't sleep anymore. Hey guys, we just arrived here and the jet lag already kicked in. We have around 5 AM in the morning now, and let's see if there's some 1-3 action here going in the Resorts World. So I take the lift down to the casino at 5 AM in the morning, hoping there's at least one table running, and indeed it was. One table of 1-3 is still running and there's one seat available. So I hop right into the game and buy in for $300. Almost everybody at the table is still ordering some drinks, some shots, and they having a great time. I'm pretty tired, but I'm so hyped to play here in Las Vegas and the action is pretty good. And now let's hop right into the hands. We already lost about $30 with ace queen of hearts in a multi-way 3-bet pot on 9-7-6 where my opponents decided to donk lead and I had to fold, but it's already pretty clear that most of my opponents like to mix it up here, 3-betting light, calling 3-bets with even wider ranges, and here we are in the under the gun position with king queen offsuit. I raise to 10, the hijack and the cutoff decide to call, and it folds to the small blind who decides to 3-bet. He squeezes to 40. I'm only sitting here 15 minutes or so and that's already his third 3-bet, so I decide to call and the other opponents get out of the way. So we have position and we see a flop of jack 10-9 with 2 diamonds. So in our second hand of this table we flop the nut straight, and even better news, my opponent in the small blind bets 55. I don't want to scare him away, so I only call here, not even have a pot size bet left behind, and we see a turn in form of the 7 of spades. So nice blank here for us. And even better news, my opponent jams for my effective stack of around 155 or so, and of course I snap call with the nuts here, and we see a brick in form of the 3 of clubs on the river and my opponent shows pocket 8s. So I actually turned the straight, but we have the nut straight. And in our second hand in Las Vegas here we almost doubled up. Pretty nice feeling. Let's hope we can continue like this. Players start to leave the table and we are only 5-handed in this one. We see a straddle from the hijack to 6, which is the under the gun position, and I'm next to act here with pocket deuces. I raise to 15, the button and the big blind are the only callers here, and we go 3 ways to a flop of king 6-3. After the big blind checks to me, I think I can take it down here with a c-bet because of my range advantage, so I bet 20, but the button has other ideas and he calls. We see an offsuit 8 on the turn, and here I think I have to slow down here with my deuces. There's no real draw other than the straight draw with 4-5, so I decide to check. The button now bets 40 and I have to fold. And that's what I do. On to the next one. In the next one we are still short-handed and I'm first to act and look down at 7-6 of clubs. I raise it up to 10, the cutoff behind me and the big blind decide to call, and we go 3 ways to a flop yet again of 7-5 deuce with 2 spades. We have top pair, a bad kicker here, and after the big blind checks to me I think I have a clear c-bet here for protection, so I bet 20. The cutoff behind me calls, but at least the big blind gets out of the way. We see a jack of hearts in the turn and I think this card doesn't change too much. The obvious flush draw missed and also the straight draws that are possible on the flop miss as well. He could have a hand like jack x of spades, but other than that I think I'm still good here, so I want to continue betting here for protection, and that's what I do. I bet 40. My opponent in the cutoff calls yet again and we see a 3 of diamonds on the river. Almost incomplete blank I guess. The obvious flush draw missed and only some disguised straight draws get there, like 6-4 or ace-5, but that is kinda unlikely I guess. I don't think betting here for thin value makes a lot of sense, because I think he will fold all of his missed hands, and checking here to induce a bluff seems like the best option to me. So I check and my opponent don't let us down. He bets 100. This sizing scares me a little bit, but I stick to my plan and call. My opponent indeed was on a draw, but he was on a straight draw. He shows us ace-4 offsuit. Damn. He got there on the river and we lose a massive one. Anyway, we keep playing and go on to the next one. It's around 8 AM in the morning and some new players joined the table again. We are 7-handed at this point I guess, and we are in the cutoff and it folds to me and I look down at pocket jacks.
There's no right way to play JIGGITIES, so it doesn't matter what I do.
Thanks for reminding me, Brad, but let's see how it goes. I raise it up to 10, the button behind me decides to call, and now it's the small blind's turn. He decides to squeeze and 3-bets to 45. To my surprise, the big blind behind him decides to cold call the 3-bet. It's back on me and I have a decision now. I could just call with my pocket jacks in position and see a flop and decide from then on, but most of the time there will be an overcard on the flop, giving me a hard time, and I had to fold most of the time I guess. But then I have another option in mind, to 4-bet shove here. We opened here in late position and the button called, so I think the small blind should squeeze a little wider than usual, and I'm not so worried about the big blind cold call. There are already $100 of dead money in the pot and I'm ready to fight for it. So I move all in for my remaining stack and it is a total of 265. The button tanks for a little bit but decides to fold, but the small blind snap calls me. Let's hope at least that he has a hand like ace king or something. The big blind gets out of the way and we see a run out. My opponent announces queens and yeah, not so good news for us here. And even worse, we see a flop of queen 9 deuce. So we are pretty much dead here. The turn finishes us, it brings a 7 and the river brings a 3. My opponent shows his pocket queens, we have to mug here. But we are still alive with a few chips. It was exactly at this time when my girlfriend texted me that she is awake as well and we can start the day together. I have only $30 left behind and I want to cash out, but then I look down at ace 7 of clubs. I get it in here, get indeed 4 callers before one player isolates me and we lose versus ace king. Unfortunately we don't cash out in this one and we lose $300 in our first session in Vegas here, but I will be back here in 2 days and maybe get some revenge.
2 days later.
We come back to the poker room at Resorts World and there are more tables running this time and we immediately get a seat again, buying in for $300 again, and let's see if we can run it up this time. Excuse me guys for the very bad camera setups in these 2 first hands, but this is literally my first hand here at the table and I get dealt pocket deuces in the low jack. There's a button straddle to 6 and it folds to me and I raise it up to 20. Only the button straddle calls and we get a very nice flop of jack 10 deuce with 2 spades. No better start to flop a set here in our first hand and I c-bet for 20. The button decides to call and we see a 10 of hearts on the turn. I think I should check this 10 most of the times because it's more likely my opponent has a 10 in his range here and this is maybe a good card for him to bluff as well, represent a 10. But as played I want to build a pot here and I keep betting and I bet 55. Unfortunately my opponent folds, but nevertheless we take down the first pot with a flopped set. Feels pretty good. The very next hand we get dealt king queen of hearts. Oh boy, if the session keeps going like this will be a good one. We are short-handed, so I'm in the big blind now and the low jack raises to 10. The cutoff, the button and the small blind decide to call. I could call here as well, playing with a decent hand out of position post flop, but I want to take the aggressive route, setting up an image for me, and so I 3-bet squeeze to 55. Because it's my second hand, all of my opponents give me credit and all of them fold. So we take down the second pot in the second hand of the table. Let's keep it going like this. In one of the next hands we are in the cutoff with pocket tens. It folds to me and I raise it up to 10. The button and the big blind behind me call and we see a flop 3 raise of ace 9 4 with 2 clubs. The big blind checks and here I think I could bet because of my range advantage. I should have way more stronger aces than my opponents should, but in the moment I decide to check. The button however now bets 11. The big blind calls and versus one small bet. I don't think I can fold here, so I decide to call as well and we see a turn. The turn brings in the king of spades and my hand loses more and more strength, but to my surprise we all decide to check this turn. We see a miracle 10 of diamonds on the river, not just giving us middle set, the obvious flush draw on the flop missed as well. After the big blind checks I need to go for value here and I bet 45. Another surprise happens when the button raises me to 150. The big blind gets out of the way immediately and I go into the tank. The only real hand that beats me is queen jack. The button is the opponent who bet the flop on ace 9 4. Does he really have queen jack? To me it feels more likely that he has a hand like ace 10. But on the other side I double block this hand. Long story short, I tank for a little bit but call this bet. I'm just too bad for folding middle set here on the river. If my opponent has queen jack, congratulations to him. And indeed, after I call, he shows me queen jack of hearts. He only had backdoors on the flop and drilled it on turn and river. After that hand we lose some more small pots before we get a much needed table change, and before that I rebuy for $200, so I'm in for 500 total now before we go into the next hand. The action on this table is way better than it was on the other one, and I immediately get rewarded with pocket kings here under the gun. I raise it up to 10 and the cutoff and the button are the only callers here. So we go 3 ways to a flop of Jack 10 7 all hearts. Unfortunately I don't have the king of hearts, but I think I need to bet here for protection, charge them flush draws, so I bet 20. Both of my opponents decide to call. We see an unfortunate turn in form of the 6 of hearts. So there are 4 cards of the same suit on the table and I don't have one of them. I check this one, basically give up on the hand, the cutoff checks and the button now bets 20. I fold because there's no chance I can improve my hand, and we go on to the next one. Here we are in the cutoff with king queen offsuit. We see a limp from the under the gun and the low jack player before the hijack raises to 12. I decide to call here in position and all of the players behind us call as well. So we go 7 ways to a flop of queen jack 4 with 2 hearts. All 5 players before me decide to check, and there are so many bad turn cards I don't want to see, and I think I have the best hand here most of the time, so I bet 40. One by one, all of my opponents decide to fold and we scoop in a very nice pot uncontested. In one of the following hands we are in the low jack with ace jack offsuit. We see a limp from the under the gun player and I'm next to act. I raise it up to 15. It folds back to the under the gun player who decides to call, so we go heads up to a flop of king king 4 with 2 diamonds. After he checks to me, I think I could go either way here, checking or betting is fine, but in the moment I decide to bet small, so I bet 11. It was this moment when I realized my opponent starts to breathe pretty heavily. Not sure if it's a sign of strength, but he decides to call. So I will play this hand a bit more cautious and we see a good turn in form of the jack of spades. He checks to me and because of the possible tell, I check back. We see a blank in form of the 3 of spades on the river and my opponent now bets 10. I mean, for this price there's no way I'm folding and I want to see if his breathing is a sign of weakness or a sign of strength. So I call and to my surprise my opponent shows pocket 9s. A hand I did not expect, but we take down the small pot. A few orbits later I pick up pocket kings again. I'm in the big blind now and we see 4 limps before the action gets to me. I definitely raise it up here. I make it $26 to go. Only one of the middle position limpers decide to call and we see a flop heads up. The dealer rolls over 10-6-3 rainbow. Pretty safe board I would say for pocket kings, so I see bet for 20. After a small time of consideration he decides to call. We see a 5 of spades on the turn. This card brings in a backdoor flush draw, but I think there's not so much I have to worry about. Because of that reason I continue betting here and I bet for 60. My opponent in the middle position thinks 60 isn't the right price here and he raises me to 125. This min raise screams strength to me. But there are some possible straight and flush draws on the board and he could have a combo draw as well, but when he takes this line I think he has more strong hands than bluff hands in his range. On the other side I have an overpair and it's only 65 more for me to call, and in the end I decide to call here, reevaluate on the river, really hoping for a 3 and a non-spade card here on the river, so I may counterfeit him, and the dealer rolls over an offsuit 8 here on the river. I check to my opponent and he jams immediately for 180 effective. I go into the tank here for a little bit, but ultimately come to the conclusion that my opponent should be very strong here most of the time, and he was one of the opponents who didn't go crazy in later streets in my mind. So after some consideration I decide to fold. My opponent proudly shows 4 deuce of hearts. So he drilled a gut shot on the turn. That makes me feel very happy with my fold here on the river. And before we go into the next hand, I rebuy for another $100. So I'm in the game for 600 total now. I'm sitting on a stack of around 300. So I have some work to do to get unstuck here, but let's see how it goes. In the next one we are under the gun here with pocket deuces. Not a 100% open raise here, but I'm stuck, so I raise it up to 10. The hijack, button and big blind decide to call and we see a flop 4 ways. The dealer rolls over 7-6 deuce rainbow. So we flop bottom set here, no better feeling than this one. The big blind checks and I c-bet for 20. Only the button decides to call and we are heads up to a turn. It brings in another 6. Sometimes I should check this turn because the board overall favors the button calling range, but I want to build a pot here so I continue betting, but keep it on the smaller side, I bet 35. My opponent on the button already had his calling chips in hand, but ultimately decides on a fold unfortunately. Anyway, we take down this pot and we have one more hand to go over. In the last hand I want to go over, I am under the gun and I put on this $6 straddle. There are 3 calls to me and I look down at king 6 of hearts. I check my option and we see a flop 4 ways. The dealer rolls over a pretty good flop for us. She brings 10, 8, 5 with 2 hearts. So we have the second nut flush draw, but all of my opponents and I agree to check this flop. We see a very beautiful 9 of hearts on the turn. So we get there with our second nuts, and even better news, my opponent in the small blind now bets. He bets 15. I decide to play this a little tricky here and just call, maybe invite the other opponents into the pot as well, and indeed one of them, the hijack, calls as well. We see a blank for us in form of the ace of clubs. It's getting better and better now because my opponent in the small blind keeps betting. He bets 45. Now I definitely have to raise this one up here. So after a small time of thinking, Hollywooding a little bit, I raise it up to 105. The hijack gets out of the way immediately and the small blind goes into the tank for a little before I end up calling. I show my second nuts and of course they are good here and we scoop in the last pot of the night. And after that hand we unfortunately lose something back, but let's go into the session update. So guys, they got us again. Also in the second session we booked a loss. We were into the game for 600 euro total and cashed out for 355. Makes a loss for 245 I guess. For both sessions it's a loss of 545. Unfortunately the win streak didn't continue here in Vegas, but we have one more session and a Bellagio I guess. Stay tuned for this one and goodbye guys.